Hi, Cabello. Can you hear me?
Hi, Celeste. I can hear you clearly. Thank you.
Hello. How are you, Cabello?
I'm fine, and you, Celeste?
I'm very well, thank you. Welcome.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you.
Hi, Vicky.
Hi, Celeste. How are you?
Hello. I'm well, and you, my dear. So nice to see you on this
Yes,
call.
likewise. I don't get onto your calls very
Wonderful.
often, so I'm quite excited.
I'm very excited. I mean, considering we had a bit of a stop-start last week, it was a disaster. We had so many people register, and then we had that whole outage, and it was
Yes,
kind of
session on Friday, and it was so challenging. And I'd
really.
emailed the client prior to the time, and I'm like, listen, don't you want to rather reschedule?
I've just been singing your praises here to Vicky, and I've been saying how you've been hand-holding me through this process. It was trial and error last week, and oh my word, how we wanted to both cry when when the global connectivity went down completely, and there was, when these macro issues sort of nail you like this, it's the last thing you expect.
That's when Africa genuinely feels like an island, because it was only us that was impacted by this outage. And I think especially West Africa, more US yearly than we were, at least. We had subsequent other alternatives that our suppliers, ISPs, could make use of. But it's definitely like, it's just in the middle of your day. You're working, just doing the normal things, or in your case, doing a presentation, and then suddenly there's connection issues, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, there goes my internet. The problem, I need to find, it's everyone.
It's everyone.
Exactly. But anyway, and Norah and I've been biting the bullet here together. Shame, I've been saying how you've been so incredibly helpful with hand-holding me through this process, Norah. I mean, we've really traveled this journey together, hey? It's been
an absolute pleasure. It really has been.
And just the amount of registrations that have come through from Santam, it just confirms what a wonderful following you've got.
It's more moral support, I guess.
No, it's wonderful. So we'll give it a little bit of time for people to jump on, and in the chat people can just put who they are and where they're from. I see Audrey's here. Hi, Audrey. Lovely to see these familiar faces.
Hi there.
Getting moral support from my tribe of people as well, which is wonderful. Hey. Sometimes it helps to have these mishaps, because then I have people like Vicky and Audrey in my meetings or in my webinars that I didn't know, would have happened, hey?
And it was in my diary for last week. So I would have made it. But I mean, our internet in itself was so just, it wasn't good enough. And I knew it wasn't going to be, because we'd already started experiencing those challenges.
Yeah, man, gee whiz.
Because it started at 12:30.
It did, but I only sort of, caught wind of it as I was busy chatting to Norah and saying, well, we prepared, we going, etc. And then everything just crashed completely, and we were trying everything in our power. You don't understand. It was just, but nothing was working. But anyway, and I said to Norah, she's not going to slip out of my fingertips here, because we traveled a longer journey. And
I tried.
And we've been so committed. We'll definitely wait a little bit longer, and you can just put in the chat there. We got a very good response, after I did resend the notification out again. And as I said to Norah, we can always do a recording, because it's actually nice to have the interaction and the conversation and everything, because that adds to it. Yeah. So with all the holidays and everything coming up, is everyone working through, not working through, taking long holidays?
Long weekend.
Nice. Very nice.
Well, that's the plan. Whether it will be that is another. So ask me again on Monday.
Okay, because you've got all good intention, but it doesn't always
I've
work
got
out
all
that
the good
way.
intentions, all of them.
Oh my
I actually
word.
forgot that there was a holiday this week, so I'm now under a little bit of stress.
Yeah, it's actually quite funny that the Easter holidays are early this year, right at
Very
the end.
early.
End of March,
Mm.
beginning of April, and then absolutely nothing for the rest of April. Very strange. How are we doing? Where's our people?
So we can be small and intimate today. It's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's not, I mean, people will, there's no waiting room, so people can pop in. I've specially created a format where people can sort of understand what questions we're speaking to in the form of a PowerPoint presentation, not death by PowerPoint, but just merely so that the questions pop up. Welcome everyone once again, and thank you for joining us. It was a bit of a take two, as you saw in my social media post on Norah and I. But just to sort of set the stage for today, the format of this Spotlight webinar is very much around conversational, very intimate, but also taking it to Norah's workplace. I think it's very important because of the fact that we have all this general insight data, etc., but nothing speaks better than actually contextualizing it into a leader like Norah's workplace, because she can speak from actual hands-on experience. What I'm going to do is, if we can just keep the cameras off so that I'm going to record the spotlight as well. Any questions, I'd really value you holding them to the end of the session and that, so we can address them. And as I say, please feel free to share the spotlight events and that. I am bringing in global as well as African leaders on board at various levels to speak the talk of employer branding. Norah obviously been in a leadership role, and the next one will be in a talent acquisition role. And just for those people that don't know who I am, my name's Celeste Siren. I am the champion and the owner of Employer Branding Africa, very passionate about employer branding as well as recruitment marketing. And I live in beautiful Cape Town, which in fact has been voted as the second best popular tourist destination in the world, believe it or not. And I'm fortunate to be staying here. I do a lot of conference presentations and that. I love getting up close and personal with people who I believe are the reason for the success behind every organization. And I have also started the Employer Branding Learning Academy, which in effect is to transfer all this universal knowledge around employer branding to those people that touch the talent brand, whether it be from a leadership perspective or whether it's talent acquisition or sourcing or HR business partnership. That is, in fact, what I do. And I've worked with a number of different brands across Africa as well. So enough about me. Let's hear what Norah has to say. I'd love you to introduce yourself and what your present position is and what your DNA is, Norah. Thank you.
Celeste, thank you. Thank you very much. And thanks for the invite as well. So Norah Sehunoe, I am based in Johannesburg. I don't know if Cape Town is the second best city in the world, what Johannesburg is, but I'm based in Johannesburg and I've got the opportunity to visit Cape Town once in a while. I'm a mom to 3 beautiful kids. I think they keep me on my toes, but more than anything, I am an absolute passionate HR professional. I'm fortunate to be doing the work that I love. I've been doing HR for almost over 20 years now. And I know often when I say that, people start trying to guess my age, but I've been doing HR for almost over 20 years. But in particular, the subject that I enjoy is the subject of leadership and employer brand and culture, especially in the past 3 years. I think after COVID, leadership has become such an important subject in the corporate world. So it's a subject that I love to study about and just familiarize myself with. I absolutely love coaching and mentoring leaders. Yeah, but my DNA is a small town, village girl. So very much down to earth. What you see is what you get.
Wonderful. Thank you, Norah. And I've been privy to that. And I think that's why we get on so well together, because with us, it's what you see is what you get kind of thing. So welcome again. And I'm really, really excited to get this conversation started, because I believe that leaders are, in fact, the secret sauce to ensuring that an employer brand works within an organization. I don't think that there is enough walking the talk, and we're going to enlighten our people today on what you're doing in terms of ensuring that that happens within Santam, because clearly, as I say, you've got a good following and you're doing something right for sure. So on the first question, obviously leadership in the modern era is quite different, and you alluded to the fact that after COVID, a lot happened. And I still believe that we've got the symptoms of COVID, the aftermath of COVID. And I believe that it's been quite a challenging time for leaders to try and adjust to this whole remote working, the emerging generation, trying to keep the culture and the flavor of the values and the behaviors going, with half people half in and half out of the workplace. And in your opinion, with leadership in the modern era today, Norah, where do you believe leaders are in fact falling short in driving the employer branding agenda?
Thanks, Celeste. I think, one of the things that I'm seeing now, and I've seen for many years, is employer branding is still seen as an HR agenda. So a lot of the leaders are not actually driving it, or they're not dedicating enough time in driving it. It's one of those things that HR is supposed to get it right, or HR is supposed to bring in all the initiatives that's going to help us to drive employer branding. And when we don't see the results, or when we start seeing symptoms that there's something wrong with the branding or the way that people experience our brand, it still then becomes an HR issue. So I think that's where we are falling short. When you look at scorecards, employer branding either is not present in some of the scorecards, or if it is there, the weighting that is allocated to it is also the minimum weighting. So on the whole, when a leader is looking at their scorecards and where they're supposed to be driving or focusing their energies, they will focus on areas where there's the highest weighting, because that's where they will get the biggest impact from a performance perspective. So employer branding is still seen as an optional extra, where you can choose whether or not you want to focus on it or not. And I think we need to start saying, how does it start becoming the leader's responsibility to drive it in the organization?
Awesome. That's wonderful, Norah. And yeah, I've seen that when it comes to building employer brands, because when it comes to the actual integration thereof, it does get shifted onto HR's plate, when in fact, employer branding is a collective. It's basically a collective effort, and it needs to be driven from CEO level right through the ranks, cross-functionally, cross-collaboratively. And I completely resonate with what you're saying. Just a very quick one. Does one actually attach key performance indicators onto employer branding in order to ensure that your leaders are possibly measured not only on performance, but also on driving the whole culture and driving the whole employer branding agenda, Norah?
Reality is that what doesn't measure doesn't get done most of the time in a lot of companies, in a lot of organizations. So, if you're not going to measure it, if you're not going to have targets to it, chances of it being done are very slim. I think especially at the beginning, when you are starting to try and lay the foundation and get it, get the culture of really just building employer branding. Once it's there and once it's a lived experience and everybody can attest to the fact that there's a positive employer brand, then maybe you can ease up on the measurements, because you also don't want it to be such a mechanistic thing where it's around the number. And maybe that's why sometimes leaders don't know how to drive it, because it's one of those things where, a lot of leaders will say, how do I measure it? It's sometimes, it's because it's an experience, there's no maturity or there's no knowledge as to how do we measure. And that's where HR will then come in to say, what are the matrix? What are some of the pillars or the levers that we can then say, we need to watch these levers because they are the ones that will tell us whether we are on the right track. I think also, I don't want to say that leaders don't know how to do it, because sometimes what we tend to forget is that when you're a leader, you are actually wearing two hats at any given time, because you are also an employee and then you are the leader. So you're supposed to be driving this employer brand, but at the end of the day, you're also the employee. So sometimes it's lack of knowing how to do it. And I think that's where we sort of get stuck as leaders to say, I want to do it, especially those that have the right intent, but they just don't know how to do it. But I agree with you. I think it needs to be measured. It needs to be visible, and we need to be very clear in terms of, what are the metrics that we are going to track in order for us to know whether we are on the right track.
Wonderful. Thank you, Norah. Yes, we definitely aligned there. And I think it is if employer branding is new to any organization, it's a matter of educating, informing, and not force feeding, but it's really about it's an educational process, and then massaging the initial integration of your employer branding agenda. So I think we're completely aligned there when it comes to the metric side of things. Wonderful. All right, and this dovetails into that question quite nicely, Norah, because when it comes to peer-to-peer influence in employer branding, we've got this employer brand, we've got the value proposition. Now we need to integrate and drive the agenda. And you're sitting with leaders that might need to be informed and they need to be educated on the whole intent behind it. But if they don't get it, it's very difficult for them to now empower employees at all levels in order to become advocates. If they don't get it, how do you then empower the employees to do it? So I'd be interested to hear either way, whether leaders get it or they're still trying to get their head around it, or whether your employees take up on it and run with it. Give me a little bit of insights on what's happened with you in the past.
So what we've tried, or in my previous life, what we've tried to do is, with employer branding, I think it's important that you break it down into behaviors. So to be very clear in terms of what are the sort of behaviors for us as a business or as a company that are non-negotiable when it comes to employer branding. So we all have values. I mean, all companies have got values, but sometimes what ends up happening is that those values, they are on the wall, everybody can see them, but we don't understand, because most of these values are words, but we don't go into a process of defining the behaviors behind each of the value. So if I bring it home to Santam, for example, we've got our values are care, integrity, collaboration, and innovation. And what we are currently embarking on is unpacking, when we talk about care, what does care look like in the Santam environment? So when we say that you need to show up and show care, what should that look like? So I think it starts with that. It starts with being very clear on what are the behaviors. And once you have the behaviors, it's important that leaders model those behaviors. You know, you need to embody it. You can't enforce, and you can't be an advocate of something that you don't know and you can't model. So it's important that they model those behaviors, and that people can see it. And the more people see it, it becomes very easy. It then becomes contagious. When it comes to employer brand, also, I think it's important that we don't sit back and make it a leader responsibility. It's one of those things where all of us are going to have that owner mentality. You know, there's the famous story of, you know, the guy that was sweeping, I think, you know, at NASA, and he was asked, you know, what are you doing? And he was saying, you know, I helped put a man on the moon. I think that is what employer branding is about. It's for all of us, because it's in every interaction that you have, whether it's with a leader or whether it's with a peer. You know, what is the smell of that place? You know, for me, that's what employer branding is about. It's what culture is about, the smell of that place. And are we clear about the behaviors so that we can call them out? And that's the work that we are currently trying to do within Santam, to say, what is the Santam way when we speak about employer brand? And what is going to be the consequence? Because that's the other thing, that, you know, we come up with these great ideas of what leaders needs to be doing, but we then very quickly, you know, revert back to driving performance and the numbers. And what ends up happening is, you know, the leader that brings in the money and brings in the numbers, and not necessarily driving or being an advocate of the employer brand, gets rewarded, which then goes against the whole thing that we are trying to do. So it's about balancing to say, you know, employer brand is driving high performance, yes, because it's important that we make a profit, but doing it, the how you do it is important. And that's where employer brand for me comes in. It's being very, very clear to say, what are the non-negotiables when it comes to how we do things around here.
Wonderful. 100%, Norah. And I think again, it's a whole educational process in terms of them understanding why they need to live the brand. There's ways and means of actually reaching high performance. How you get there, there's different ways of skinning this cat. So how do you get there? And it's around basically giving them the tools, the understanding, and the insight on why you do things certain ways. So what are the, you know, you can appreciate and recognize performance, but it is equally important to appreciate and recognize the manner in which you reach your performance. So
and one, yes, and one thing that you said, Celeste, at the beginning around, you know, what the after effect of COVID is that we often speak about the new ways of work, or the new world of work that we find ourselves in. Reality is that a lot of the leaders have had to relearn how to lead and how to manage, because, you know, managing face-to-face and managing in a hybrid world are very different. And one area I think that was neglected, and where we need to do a lot of catching up, I know certainly in the organizations that I've worked in, where we didn't focus enough time, was on really equipping and upskilling line managers and leaders to say, this is how you manage somebody that is working from home. Because that entire relationship now needs to be guided by trust more than anything. And I think that's where the issue also is, to say, we talk about employer brand. So some of the feedback that I get from managers is, how do I drive culture when people are not in one space? How do I drive employer brand? You know, is it still important, or do we now just focus on performance because we are no longer in one space? So I think it's a totally new space for a lot of the leaders, and they are trying to navigate their way through it. And it's important. And that's where, I guess, you know, professions like HR needs to then step in, and professions like people that have learned employer brand, where, you know, you still show the impact and the importance of still having a positive employer brand in driving performance.
Correct. Wonderful. Gee, we stayed quite long on this question.
We
but
did.
It was
Sorry.
really, it was really good. I loved that discussion. Thank you. All right. So I think this might be repetition, but we can maybe build on our previous question. In terms of the challenges in driving employer branding within leadership, in your experience, what are the most significant challenges leaders face when attempting to drive the employer brand agenda throughout the organization? I think we've touched on that, Norah, and we can maybe evolve it a little bit more.
Yes.
With you saying that some people don't know how to actually walk the talk. How do I drive culture? How do I drive this agenda? So they almost need to be given the tools or their hand holding and with saying, Norah, how do I get there? Because I really want to appreciate and recognize our team of people living the brands and behaving the way they should, and basically moving that word on the wall to actioning it. So what are the challenges other than what you've already expressed from leaders that are trying to drive this agenda?
One of the other challenges is, our country is very rich and colorful, that's why we call it the rainbow country, the rainbow nation. Diversity will always be an issue. And when I talk diversity, not necessarily from a race perspective, it's about how do you drive employer brand in an environment where you've got different generational or age gap. Because what a millennial or what a young individual is looking for from an employer brand is very different from somebody who is nearing retirement. And now as a leader, you are trying to navigate the space where you have been equipped. So you've been given this toolbox to say you need to model it, but in you modeling it, you need to also be the advocate, but also drive it. And it's about how do you make sure that it's not generic, and how do you make sure that the experience, regardless of who you drive it with, that you ultimately get the same result from an experience perspective. So a lot of the leaders are, it just feels like it's added responsibilities that's been given to them to say, okay, I've been asked to model this employer brand. I've been asked to drive it, but now I'm in an environment where, there's different genders, there's different races, there's different generational gaps, there's different lifestyle stages as well. One of the things that we're starting to look at within the Santam space is when we talk about diversity, to say we probably need to start segmenting our employees based on life stages. Because, if you're only looking at it from a race and gender or from a generational gap, you're also missing some of the nuances. So what's going to be important is to probably map different life stages, to say you and I can be different ages, we can be different races, but we might be at the same life stage, and therefore looking for the same or similar experience from an employee, from an employer perspective. So I think that's where the work is going to have to come in, to say we need to define, and we need to be able to say to line managers, this is how you then navigate this richness that sits in our diversity. So for me, the biggest challenge is knowing how to navigate it. How do I make sure that what I've tried with Norah, that works with Norah, if I tried with Celeste, I need to tweak it a little bit, but still maintaining the core of what is it that I'm trying to say, or what is it from a behavior perspective that I'm trying to drive.
Yeah, absolutely. I can relate completely. I think in terms of the relatability of one's EVP as you move through, almost like your life cycle. It's like, when you get married and when you have a baby, everyone's affected differently. So that whole personalization as people go through that life cycle is important. So it's quite a calculated approach towards how leaders need to address and also tailor how they are, how can I say, molding their employer value proposition, employer brand around those individuals. So I think it's become that much more calculating, but I think it's also about being intentional and being aware at the same time of the fact that you can't have that blanket approach, Norah.
100%. And I think you're so right that it's about the intention. And for me, that's what I always look for in a lot of my leaders when we start talking about employer brand, to say, is the intention there? Do I want to do it? Do I want to know how to do it as well? Because it's not even rocket science. Sorry, if I can call it that. And I think that's why sometimes it's such a neglected thing, because we're also assuming that everybody has it. Because for me, I always say, you know, employer brand is about taking it back to the basic human need. And the basic human need for everybody is really to be treated with respect, you know, to have a level of care in your interaction, and to be treated with dignity. So if you just remind yourself as a leader around that, to say, you know, in every interaction that I have, regardless of which organization you are in, you know, I think those are the basic, what people are asking for are basic human behaviors and the way that we interact. I was saying to my team earlier this month that we probably, for us to get this thing right, we probably need to go back to nursery teaching and what they used to teach us. I've got a 5-year-old, and he came home one day with a list of behaviors, you know, that they are teaching them. And it's behaviors like we share, we say please, we say thank you, we respect each other, we don't fight. You know, and I think if you take that and you bring it into the workplace with adults, if I look at a lot of what I normally have to mediate, all of it, 9 out of 10 times, you can take it back to those 5 basic steps or 5 basic behaviors that we were all taught when we were 5, 6, 7 years old. It's just that because now it's in a corporate environment, we've sophisticated it and we call it, you know, other things. And I think for me, it's really about that. It's about teaching leaders how to just be human beings that treat other human beings with care and dignity, and respect.
Correct. No, thanks for that. And I like the analogy as well, because I've also got children. They're adults, well, they're young varsity adults and that. And they're different personalities, their needs, their wants, their desires, everything is completely different. So tailoring and understanding the methods of communication and how you roll is as important as if you are a leader within an organization, addressing those people's desires and their needs and the various tenures that they are moving through. So just in terms of overcoming silos and driving collaboration, because again, you know, in a big organization like Santam, you obviously have so many different divisions. Now, in terms of the strategies, I'd like to understand, how do you ensure that cohesive employer branding message permeates through the organization and, you know, ensuring that it doesn't sit as merely just values on the wall and actually becomes actionable?
So this is work in progress for us, but I think we've laid a strong foundation, because I think this is one of the things that needs to have a top-down approach and a bottom-up approach as well. Last year was a lot about a top-down approach. So we went on what we called the CEO Roadshow, and the aim of those roadshows was for our CEO, together with his executive team, to really go to all the business areas and to talk about our strategy, to talk about our values, and to talk about what is important to us as an organization, and really what is the heart of our organization. And for us, why that was important was that it was important for every single Santam employee to hear from the CEO and hear the same message. The next step is, how do we cascade that and make sure that that message is constantly reinforced by each of the executives in each of the areas. Because once you've heard it the first time from the most senior person in the organization, you know, the expectation, certainly from us, is that, you know, you should then be hearing it, the same message from your leaders as well. So that's the top-down approach, to say it's around engagement. It's about constantly driving the same message, but it's also about it not only being about, you know, the presentations and the road shows, but people feeling it as well, you know, in their interaction with the leaders. What we are going to be embarking on this year is now listening to the employee voices, to say, you know, we've done quite a lot of initiatives to try and drive this employer brand, this culture, this employee experience. Obviously, what we do from a measurement perspective, we've got Pulse, what we call a Pulse survey, which is really just a way of us of getting feedback in terms of how people are experiencing our culture, and how, you know, how engaged are our employees or our people. So now what we want to do is go beyond the survey, because sometimes you find that with the survey, because you're sitting there and you're completing it, it also depends on where it finds you mentally when you are completing it. What we want to do this year is to go into conversations, because there is power in storytelling, and there's power in sitting and listening to people's lived experiences of your employer brand. And that's what we want to solicit, to understand, to say, you know, this is what we are trying to drive. These are the behaviors that we want you to experience from our leaders. What has been your lived experiences? And with that information, we will then look at where the gaps are and how do we then close the gap. But for now, it's really about making sure that we are creating a safe enough environment where people can really give the feedback, because that for me sometimes is the challenge, where, you know, because there's level of, and it's often termed psychological safety, that people don't feel psychologically safe to give honest feedback. So, you know, for us, it's about how do we really create that environment where people, they feel that they can come forward and say, you know, this is, you guys are saying this on paper, but this is what we are experiencing on the floor. And us understanding, you know, where those two worlds actually collide, and how do we make sure that we are closing the gap.
Yes, absolutely. And I see she's made a comment here and said, obviously the fireside chats and the informal meetings and, you know, having open conversations, you know, that obviously still gives that feeling of safe space. And I think that holds a lot of credibility, and taking a deeper dive where people have got a chance just to be listened to, because there's too much talking and communicating, and sometimes all they want is to be heard at the end of the day. And I think if those voices can be heard, that will really bode for very good discussions as well, and confirmation of what direction you're taking and where the gaps lie as well.
And Vicky is right. Sorry, Celine. Vicky is right, but you know, it's one of the consequences of hybrid work, that you know, what used to be the water cooler conversations, what used to be the smoking area conversations, you know, those have suddenly, they're not there anymore for those people that are working from home. So that's why I think you find that we've probably taken a couple of steps backwards when it comes to really, you know, having the conversation and getting the feedback, because people are at home and people are working at home. So that's where some of the challenge as well, in terms of the strategies. I mean, more and more companies are starting to drive people to come back to the office, because we've seen that there is value and productivity in being in one space. And it's about how do we do that, and how do we start seeing that, so that we can start, you know, having those ad hoc impromptu conversations, corridor talk. We no longer have those as well. So that's one of the other obstacles that we have to deal with.
Yes, completely. And I'm hearing this more and more, funny enough, Norah. You know, whether you're speaking to facilitators, coaches, HR specialists, you know, even in talent acquisition, where people are they're trying to compete for talent, but they're finding it difficult because people are saying, but I like to work hybrid. And the company is saying, but you can't work hybrid anymore. We've decided to backtrack because we see far more value in our people working collectively in a shared environment. So I think there's a lot of head butting at the moment. I think there's also a lot to be said in the manner in which it's positioned and promoted, the pros and cons, and the reasoning behind why all of a sudden do we have to change this key pillar in our value proposition to no longer remote, but actually in person, or no longer in person, but whatever. So I think there's going to be a lot of changes, because what was nice due to COVID is now starting to have a bit of a ripple effect. And I think the manner, again, in how that is handled, and the tools that for example, your talent leaders are given in terms of having those conversations when it comes to recruiting possible young leaders into Santam, I think that's very, very important, because they might say, I don't want to hear from you if you're not offering me hybrid. Or I don't want to hear from you if it's purely in person or in office. There are going to be repercussions against that. But again, it's all about communication, isn't it? It's how
it is, absolutely. And maybe that's another spotlight question to say, you know, we talk employer branding, but you are so right. There are some individuals that even when at recruitment stage, you know, they say, I want to work 100% at home. I don't want to be in the office. I am not driven by being in one room with other people. You know, I'm self-directed. I'm an individual. So you've got a grouping of those individuals. And I think the question is there space for those type of individuals? You know, our culture motto is come as you are in Santam, right? We promote that you need to come as you are from a diversity perspective, and diversity in all aspects. And we get challenged on that, because, you know, in cases where you are then driving somebody to come to the office, they're like, but you're telling me to come as I am, Norah. I really not a people person. I don't want to be in the office. So it's constantly challenging HR to think about, why do you need me to be in the office for you to drive employer brand? And that's where the making sure that, you know, you are creating bespoke solution for people depending on where they're at, because your employer brand or your EVP must then be in such a way that it can be customizable. So if I'm somebody that really does not have to come to the office, and that's why, I mean, one of the things that we've done is we don't have a blanket approach. So we've mapped people depending on the roles that they do. So we still have people that come to the office 5 days a week. We've got people that are hybrid, but then we've got people that also work from home or they're offsite. So I think for me, it's really around that. It's understanding what is it that we are trying to achieve? What actually is the ultimate, the why behind why we're asking people to do what we want them to do.
Fabulous, fabulous, fabulous. Love everything that you are saying here. And I think to the next question, you've really highlighted one of the success factors in implementing employer branding within Santam. And, you know, I mean, again, you can add to this, but I would almost say that the sheer example of you having a look at tailoring the EVP to those individuals and giving a good understanding on why, the why behind it is very, very important. And yes, I mean, if there are any other success factors that, or any other employer branding leadership initiatives that you are implementing at the moment when it comes to those kind of bespoke kind of solutions, please let us hear them. Yeah.
So maybe not currently at Santam, because like I said, you know, for us, it's work in progress. There's a lot that we are doing, but for me, I think an example of where I've seen it work. And it's in one of my previous organizations where, you know, when we talk about a leader walking the talk, you know, and that for me is very important when it comes to employer brand, that it needs to start from the very top. It can't be starting from middle management and then everybody else doesn't, you know, doesn't model it. Because then what happens is that the middle managers become a buffer, and everybody below them, you know, they experience this great employer brand, employee experience, but then the middle managers, they suffer. They become like that middle sandwich that suffer because they don't experience it from the top. So that's why it's so critical that it's driven from the top. But a quick example is, you know, there's a leader that I used to work with, and it was basic things that he used to do that I thought if I could take this and write a book or bottle it, I could do it. Was literally, you know, as he walked through the main door, he will greet the security guards waiting at the door by name. Not just greet, but greet by name. And not because, you know, the security guard had a name tag, but because this is a person that works there every single day. And at some point, he learned the name. Right. So very intentional. He was such a leader that, you know, in every interaction that he had with every individual, regardless of level, he made you feel important, and he would be present in that conversation. He listened very, very well. So he was known to say, you know, if you meet him in the corridor, catch him and have a conversation with him. And I think, you know, there are some people that just naturally have it in them. But for me, what was also critical in him modeling this behavior that he wanted to see in all of his leaders is that, you know, he used to block time in his diary where he would literally during the day or at lunchtime leave his office, because a lot of our leaders are sitting in these high offices. He will leave his office and he will go to the canteen and he'll buy himself a meal. He will look around the canteen, and where he sees an open desk where people are sitting together, but there's a chair, he will go and he will join them. At first, it used to be a little bit scary because it's like, oh my God, the CEO is sitting with me and I'm just here and I'm trying to relax. And he will sit and he will have a conversation where he was interested in knowing how people were experiencing the culture, how they are doing, share with them where the business is at, you know, his wishes for the business. And word started spreading. And what used to happen is that you used to see more, you know, more footprint in the canteen during lunch because people will look forward to seeing him pop in. You know, sometimes he'll be in the coffee shop, sometimes he'll literally just walk the floor. So he would, you know, if he's got 5 minutes, he will leave and then he'll just walk the floor and go to one department. For me, what that did is that he was walking the talk. I think Celeste, you spoke about walking the talk.
Yes,
he wasn't
correct.
just saying it, he wasn't just putting it on email, but he was showing and modeling to every single individual in the business what it means to really live and drive and embody the employer brand. And it makes it, you know, it started making it uncomfortable for those people that were not living the employer brand or living the culture or living the values, if you want to call it that. It started making it uncomfortable for those people to be in that environment, because then it felt like they were the ones that were misplaced. And I think that's what we need to start doing. We need to start creating an environment where people that are not upholding or living the employer brand start feeling uncomfortable, and not the other way around. Because I think what often happens is that, you know, the people that are not necessarily walking the talk, they are the ones that are walking with their heads held high, and everybody else feels uncomfortable around them. And we need to switch that around a little bit.
Correct. I think that's a brilliant idea. And again, it also stems to your employee advocacy as well. You talk about being contagious, Norah, you know, and it is about that contagious behavior of walking the talk of employer branding and having it come straight from the very top, which is the CEO.
Absolutely.
Then influencing the leaders, and leaders actually with just merely by behavior is he actually walking the talk of employer branding? He's not saying anything. He's literally just behaving accordingly.
He's
on
just
how-
being a nice
Yes,
human being, Celeste.
yes,
He's just
exactly.
being a nice human being.
Exactly, quite right. I love that example. So in terms of key takeaways, I'm just cognizant of time, Norah, because I know you're also on a tight schedule. The time always goes so quickly on these spotlights. What steps do you reckon our audience should take to ensure leaders start intentionally living their employer brand promise, other than that CEO who is, in fact, going into the canteen, buying himself a coffee or whatever, and mingling with the people who he should be, getting in the trenches, getting on the front line, and not sort of sitting in his strategic tower and calling the shots? I mean, what other steps do you reckon our leaders should be doing?
So I think for me, what probably, maybe let me start with us as other people, not necessarily in leadership, and maybe even when you are in leadership, when you're looking at your own leaders, is that we need to recognize it and celebrate it when we see it happening. Sometimes we don't celebrate it enough. And sometimes, when you celebrate something, then you reinforce it. But more importantly, we need to be brave enough to call it out when it doesn't happen. And I think for me, the operative word being brave, because I don't think that all of us are, we need to be comfortable to put up mirrors, and say, hey, that is not the employer brand that I thought this organization was driving. So that for me is important. But I think we also need to have grace for each other and recognize and understand that for a lot of us, this is a new world that we are finding ourselves in. Something happened and something shook the world of work when COVID happened. And let's not underestimate that shaking, what it did. I think, yes, we were able to come back, and yes, we were able to find ourselves in this hybrid ways of work, but let's not underestimate the impact that it has had. And that for some of us that were already battling with leadership and driving employer brand before COVID, we are now even in a far worse off position, because the capability that is now required of us are far more than what we could even have thought about. So I think it's to have grace, but for me, it's about, if you can see that the intent is there and that there is intention to learn and there is intention to really start upskilling oneself, that we give grace for that. Where there is just, you can see that this individual is just not interested, there needs to be consequences as well. So I think for me, it's really about that, to say we are all discovering this thing as we go. We are all literally trying to fix and build. Let's do that together. But let's call each other out when we can see that some things are, they are toxic to our environment. And let's celebrate where it's being done, because when you celebrate it, there's more of it, and it's contagious. We all want to work for a wonderful organization. We don't, you don't want to wake up in the morning and not want to go to work. I think that's what's important. And this is what it's about. This is really about creating an environment where all of us on a Monday morning want to jump out of bed and really sing out loud because you're going to the office.
Yes, yes. Wonderful. Thank you for that. So we at the end now, and for those people, thank you, Norah. Thanks for answering those questions. They were very informative, and I feel sorry for those people that did not jump onto this webinar, because at the end of the day, this is gold. What you have shared with us today, this is gold. I would like to take it further by saying, if you want to support leaders like Norah, you need to understand what employer branding really is all about. Whether it be your personal brand that can actually support the leadership efforts like Norah, to wear your employer brand proudly and walk the talk, whether it be to be able to articulate the reasoning behind why you have to come into office and not work remotely or maybe hybrid, or whether it be understanding the full reasoning behind why employer branding actually gets built from start to finish, and the intention behind why Norah has this on her agenda when it comes to the people management aspect within Santam, and why it needs to actually get as much preference as meeting targets, meeting goals within the organization. So if you want to register for the free course, please go to Employer Branding Africa's Learning Academy, because we actually dig in at different levels, and it all is supporting the discussion that we've had today around leadership and how you can make the life of leaders like Norah that much more easier in being an advocate and understanding the whole agenda behind employer branding. Right, that's it. How's our time doing now? We've got 2 more minutes.
That's perfectly so, perfectly so.
Wonderful. There's been quite a few comments here, and a lot of people making comments with regard to the fact that it's important to carry out our duties and our responsibilities at every interaction, even reverse mentoring and calling people out, I would say, as well as accrediting people for walking the talk positively. And I need my glasses, excuse me. And Vicky also saying that COVID made us antisocial and hyper-productive. Now we need to relearn how to come back to the office and manage and be social and productive in our roles. She personally feels that there is still room for hybrid work in easing back into office full-time in a full-time situation, but there are employees who also for the team environment. And I agree 100% here with you, Vicky, because I think that your Generation Z missing out on a lot when it comes to the mentorship and the coaching aspect. It's not the same when it comes to actually sitting next to Norah and watching her actually go through the motions in person. So that's just one example of how we need to start looking at addressing our new emerging generation and what's in it for them. And again, shaping that whole message and that tailored EVP around why their value proposition is that of sitting with Norah in person in a
100%
office environment. So that's just an example when it comes to that. I see we've had 1 or 2 people drop off here, but we've had great conversation going, and thank you for the kudos from the people that have joined us. Really appreciate your support in Norah and my hosted spotlight. And just in terms of our next Thought Leaders Spotlight, which will be on the 16th of April, we've got the Head of Talent Acquisition from Zutari called Norah Sehunoe. And Mercy basically is going to chat about talent acquisition and how do you actually, I'm sure you've seen this kind of challenge as well, Norah, how do you actually motivate for a budget when it comes to ensuring that your talent leaders have got budgets and muscle behind acquiring the best talent in such a competitive market that we are working in at the moment. And then just thanking you all very much. There are the QR codes to Employer Branding Africa's website. There are my contact details. Please, please join the community, the employer branding community. It would really be nice to have you there. It also will keep you enlightened on what's happening on employer branding and recruitment marketing in this territory. And also have a look at those courses and see whether there's something that resonates with you. I really, really do believe that if you are going to drive an employer branding agenda, you need to understand fully where it starts, which is in effect with you. So thank you very much to everyone, and
Thank you. Thanks, Celeste.
thank you.
Thank you very much.
And thanks to everyone for joining us today.
Thanks. Cheers.
There we go.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Celeste
Nora.
and
Thanks,
Nora.
Celeste.
Bye.
Appreciate it.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.